looking at the books of the Bible. We're going to start at Genesis, go all the way to Revelation, and look at each book of the Bible. But today we are starting in the book of Genesis. Now, Genesis is a part of the first section in the Bible, which we learned last week is called the book, or the section called the Law. And what is the law? When we think about the law, we usually think of the 10 Commandments that were given to Moses. But it is more than that. These first 5 books, God gives many instructions in these first 5 books. These first 5 books are often called the Pentateuch, which is what Israel recognized as law. Now, why did God give Israel the law? God gave Israel the law because it set them apart from all other nations, and it made them stand out as God's chosen people. What does the New Testament say about the law? So in Matthew 5:17, Matthew 5:17. So Matthew 5:17 tells us that Jesus came to fulfill the law, and he is the only person that has ever kept the law perfectly. In Romans 7:7, and Galatians 3:24. So these verses tell us that the law shows us our sin and points us back to Christ. So the first question we're going to look at for Genesis is who wrote Genesis. So in Luke, I think it's 24:27, and John 5:46 tells us that Moses wrote a lot of the Old Testament. And he wrote the first 5 books known as the Law, which is why sometimes the Law is known as the books of Moses. So this tells us that Moses wrote the books, or wrote Genesis. All right, so we're going to look. The word Genesis means beginnings, and Genesis shows us the beginning of everything. Let's look at the outline of Genesis. So we have creation, which happens in chapters 1 and 2. Next, we have the beginning of sin in the world, which is chapters 3 and 4. The next thing we see is Noah and the flood, which is chapters 5 through 9. The next thing that we see is the beginning of nations and languages, which is chapters 10 and 11. The next thing we look at in Genesis is Abraham's family, which is a lot of chapters. It is chapters 12 through 38. The last point that we look at in the book of Genesis is Joseph and God's people going to Egypt. God's people going to Egypt. Going to Egypt. Okay, now this is verses 39 through 50. Okay. So this is our basic outline for Genesis. Now, who are the main people that we read about in Genesis? So we have Adam and Eve. We got Adam, we got Eve, we got Noah, we have Abraham, we've got Isaac, we got Jacob, and we got Joseph. Jacob and Joseph. So these are the main people that we see in Genesis. So this is the basic outline that we have for Genesis. This is what Genesis has to offer us. Now, I have a Bible study that is on the webpage, faithandependent.com, under the youth section of the webpage. Now, we are going to do a Bible study that is, it'll have each day listed out for you what I want you to read. And we are going to look at the beginning of everything in Genesis. That's what we're going to read from Genesis, is the beginning of everything. Okay, thank you for watching the video. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you next week. Alrighty, so I am adding this in here. I found this and thought this was really interesting. So this is a map of all the events that happen in Genesis. This specific page is Abraham's journey. And I would like you guys to take notes of these references. And while you read, you can actually see where these things happened. There will also be a picture of this on the website. Now this next page here, if I can zoom out a little bit, so you can see, is the journey of Jacob and Joseph. So again, we have the references you can take note of here. And the references you can take note of. And this will also be on the website too. You can keep the picture for reference. And this down here as well. So hopefully guys, that helps you guys out when you're reading.